When most people think of a big city, they don't think of Humboldt, Tennessee. In some eyes, Humboldt is the stereotypical small country town. Humboldt is a part of Gibson County, about 80 miles from Memphis. It's the home to about 10,000 people, many of whom working agricultural jobs with soybeans, cotton, and strawberries. Others working in major industries of car parts, asphalt, or sporting goods. And for a week every May, just before temperatures of the South become scorching, Humboldt holds the West Tennessee Strawberry Festival. The tradition is over 60 years old, a time for fireworks, carnivals, music, horse shows, and the strawberry recipe contest. In Humboldt, everyone knows each other, and news travels fast. On any given day, anyone can become a local celebrity. However, one man's fame had spread throughout the city of Humboldt and to many other parts of the country. In the early 1970s, it was because of this man that Humboldt received a large dose of unusual and, in many ways, unwanted national media attention. Attention people are largely still reluctant to talk about today.
The small town of Humboldt, Tennessee has been the scene of a murder trial this week. The defendant is Jessie Hill Ford, a writer of best-selling novels. He was charged with killing a young black soldier. The case is as intense and complex as the plot of one of his own stories about the tortured race relations of a small southern town.
It was the ultimate irony. Jessie Hill Ford, a proponent of civil rights, was put on trial for the murder of African-American soldier George Dokes, Jr. Dokes was home on leave and had planned to return to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, that very night. Ford claimed that he was protecting his family and that the shooting was an accident. The soldier's family claimed Dokes was an unarmed man in the wrong place at the wrong time. Regardless, it was an incident that would haunt Ford until the day he died. In the next 30 minutes, a story will be revisited of how one fateful night, a night many say never should have happened, and the trial that followed changed the lives of two families and the town of Humboldt for many years to come. Jessie Hill Ford, Jr. was born in 1928 in Troy, Alabama. Ford grew up in Nashville, Tennessee before attending Vanderbilt University, where he had a great interest in writing. After enlisting in the Navy, Ford continued to study writing. By the late 50s, he had moved with his wife to her hometown of Humboldt to write full-time.
Well, he was charming, and I personally thought Jessie, when I met him, was a genius. Now, he was quiet. He had a sense of humor. He wasn't real outgoing. You know, he wouldn't grab you and hug you and tell you he loved you and he was glad to see you, but he did everything in a quiet way.
As he wrote, he embraced the region's history and coupled it with the current themes of America's racial conflict. In 1961, Ford's first novel, The Mountains of Gilead, drew praise from critics and established him as a promising upstart author. His second novel, The Liberation of Lord Byron Jones, only proved to cement Ford's reputation. He was compared to William Faulkner as a man who had the power to change discrimination through his literature. By 1965, Ford seemed destined for greatness. The Liberation of Lord Byron Jones became a bestseller, a Book of the Month Club selection, and a National Book Award nominee. The novel takes place in the fictional town of Somerton, though many knew it was a model of Humboldt. The plot centers around a black undertaker and his attempt to divorce his promiscuous white wife in such a dignified way that he sets up a white policeman as her lover. The undertaker's racist lawyer represents him in the divorce, only to later betray him to the policeman. As a result, the policeman murders the undertaker to prevent the affair from surfacing during divorce proceedings. The idea arose from a mysterious 1955 murder involving Humboldt's wealthy black undertaker, James Claybrook. As Ford had been told, Claybrook's wife, Dorothy, had been having an affair with a white policeman. Through his striking array of characters and knack for regional jargon, Ford was able to show an honest depiction of racism and Southern bigotry. After all, the struggles of the civil rights movement were at a peak.
Of course, we had a lot of ground to cover in the early 70s because of the turbulent 60s. In the 1960s, there were a great deal of demonstrations against what was known as, thought to be traditional way of life for Southerners, both black and white. And it was, the 70s ended up being basically sort of a move into a new era. We were attempting to mend some fences after the 60s and great number of demonstrations, so things hadn't quite settled down, though, yet in the early 70s.
Racial strife and distrust polarized many Southern towns. It was no surprise then that the book brought Ford wealth and fame, but it also brought him anger from the community.
A lot of people resented, because everyone knew who people were in the book. And I'm a friend with a person that is African American that was written about in the book. So, they think he exploited Humboldt.
His town was fictitious. Everybody used to talk about Humboldt. And then when he based at least one of his stories on an actual incident which involved race, that didn't help the matter any with the way the people of Humboldt thought.
On the night of November 16, 1970, Jessie Hill Ford and his wife Sally awoke to the sound of a car in the private driveway of their Canterfield estate. Ford's son Charles was at a friend's house and was expected back at any moment. However, as Sally Ford followed the pattern of headlights circling the Ford house, she knew it wasn't her son.
At any rate, they did not come home, and he waited up for them. And they didn't come home when he thought they should come home. And he was watching for them. And I have ridden my horse all over Canterfield. You wouldn't recognize it now, of course, because it's a housing development. But it was wooded, and it was he had large acreage. And there was a little lane, and I had come through that lane many times. And he was looking out the window for his boys. As I understand it, I wasn't, of course, there with him.
The driver of the car turned off the headlights and parked near a sassafras hedge as Sally Ford woke up her husband. Ford told his wife to call the police, grabbed his loaded .30-06 caliber Enfield rifle, and ran outside. The Ford family had a right to be suspicious.
Paranoid is not a good word, but in his mind, something was going to happen to his boys.
Many town residents had become upset with how the city was portrayed in the new film version of The Liberation of Lord Byron Jones. In the previous months, garbage had been dumped on Ford's lawn, cattle had been frightened, and approximately 70 anonymous, harassing phone calls had been made threatening the Ford family. The white and black schools of Humboldt had recently been integrated. As a result of the merger, white athletes occupied many of the positions blacks were used to playing. Charles Ford had taken one of those positions.
Well, I understand that one of the problems was when it was more in the athletic department, when the Stegall team came to the high school, that some of the blacks didn't get the position on the team, maybe that they'd had him on the old team, and that was cause of some friction.
With Jessie Hill Ford's boys playing football and getting starting positions was a way of trying to move into the arena of integration. And he was a well-established man in the community. And for his sons to be out front and playing on a team with African Americans, in the eyes of many people, was just a way of mending those fences I've been talking about.
In court, Ford testified he feared the car was waiting for Charles to return home in order to hurt him as soon as he pulled into the driveway.
That place on his property would be right as you come into the driveway, this lane cut off from the road, from the driveway, which was a long, winding driveway. And it could very well have been someone waiting for those boys.
Ford claimed he got close to the car and fired a warning shot into the air. There was no response. Ford went to the back of the car and struck the car with the butt of his rifle. He yelled, quote, "Come out of the car, you are under arrest. The police have been called." He stated at that exact moment the headlights turned on and the car began to move away. Fearful that the speeding car might collide with his sons, he fired another unaimed shot. This shot shattered the back car window and killed 21-year-old George Dokes instantly. The passenger door flew open and a young woman ran out with a small child to the neighboring house of James Teague. Documents and published reports revealed, once the police arrived, it was discovered that Dokes' pants had been down around his knees.
So many wrong things that were said in the paper.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they printed just like they wanted to, not the way
magazines too.
Yes, not the way things actually happen.
However, the woman in the car was not Dokes' wife. She was 16-year-old Allie Andrews, a cousin of the well-documented Dorothy Claybrook, the undertaker's wife.
I can't understand why Mr. Ford to shoot it when he was going out of his driveway. And the police told me his own self that night that when they got there, the motor was still running, but he had his foot on the brakes. And that was what was held him there. Well, why would he shoot him with him if he thought he was going to do something to him with him going the other way?
There's so many questions that never have been answered, and we'll never know.
The next day, Ford discovered he would be charged with first-degree murder. The charge was later reduced to second-degree murder.
The judge never did explain it to us, why it happened like that. Because they went in, when the jury went in and it came back out, the first degree or whatever it was to a misdemeanor or something, now I can't remember exactly what it was, it had changed. And why it had changed, I never know.
The trial's dimensions were numerous. Already tense black-white relations of the trial were complicated and intensified by the racial aspects of Ford's literature.
In those days, times were really tough between African Americans and the white population around here, and I guess it was everywhere. And something like that was definitely racial. So it created a lot of friction between the two groups.
Many of the residents could not have been happier that Ford was now the recipient of the distorted brand of Southern justice he had so fervently exposed in his writing.
Southern small towns are very cliquish, and they tend to stick together. And Jesse had a wealth of friends, but he also had some people that he loved to annoy. So it went all together because it was Jessie Hill Ford.
Attorneys James D. Center III and John Kaiser represented Ford, while District Attorney General William Kenton and L.L. Harrell handled the prosecution.
My father and I were hired by the Dokes family as special prosecutor. The gentleman who was running the show was District Attorney General Bill Kenton. We were assisting him in that. Of course, he listened to our suggestions.
Judge Dick German presided over the trial with 12 men in the jury. 11 were white. 1 was black.
Well, it was pretty detailed because this was a high-profile case. Mr. Ford was well known in the community. The Dokes family was well known in the community. And it was just a matter of being able to find individuals who said that they did not have any feeling concerning the case. They had an open mind, and it was difficult to do. We went through a good many prospective jurors.
The trial officially began on Tuesday, June 28, 1971 in Humboldt City Hall.
The amusing part of it is they totally restored the courtroom because they knew it was going to be a stage. Because at that time, Jesse had become notable and had done well with his books.
The defense made its case, stating Ford only shot the rifle in hopes of holding the car until police arrived and had no intention of hurting anyone. The prosecution admitted Dokes had trespassed, but did not deserve to be shot for it.
Oh, without any doubt, the shooting itself was intentional. Whether he intended to scare someone or intended to inflict harm, nobody will know because you can't go into his mind.
The state called many witnesses in presenting its case. One of the most touching was the sobbing testimony of Reverend George Dokes Sr. This was the point where it was discovered Private Dokes had been home more than his allowed time and was now AWOL. The state's prime witness, Allie Andrews, who was also a cousin to Dokes, testified she and Dokes were not having sex in the car and that she did not even know his pants were down until he had been shot. She continued by saying Dokes came to visit her while she was babysitting, and they went to get a hamburger. On the way back home, he had become lost and mistakenly pulled into the Ford's driveway, not seeing the posted no trespassing signs. Andrews also stated she had not heard the first warning shot and saw Ford with a rifle aimed on his shoulder. Center countered the Andrews testimony by bringing in a firearms expert and an ophthalmologist, who both discredited the state's prime witness. During this time, Ford had developed a conspiracy theory regarding Allie Andrews. He believed that to avenge the reputation of her cousin Dorothy Claybrook, Andrews and Dokes had set out to kill him and his family. In addition, Ford accused Andrews of being the person in connection with the anonymous, obscene phone calls.
He might have gotten threatened calls. He might have, but we don't know. But for him to go out to the car, the car was in the driveway, and he was on his way out. No, I don't feel like I just feel like he would just shoot. He didn't care who it was. He didn't care.
While on the stand, Ford said he recognized Andrews' voice as the caller's when she took the stand at the preliminary hearing. The jury was not present in the courtroom at this time, and Judge German declared details of the phone calls to be inadmissible. This caused Ford to become paranoid that German, who was the prosecutor in the unsolved Claybrook case, resented him and his book. Ford's mindset was more than that of a paranoid man, but of a man who was emotionally crumbling. While he was in Hollywood working on the screenplay of The Liberation of Lord Byron Jones, with screenwriter Sterling Siliphant, Ford was introduced to a new way of life. According to a 1997 issue of Esquire magazine, Hollywood's materialism began to get the better of him. Ford had been having affairs. His wife found out, and his marriage was collapsing. In addition, Ford had continued to drink and use B12 methamphetamine shots. Ford once told a friend that the shots gave him, quote, definite paranoid overtones. It was not known if Ford was on anything the night of the murder. The case went to the jury on the afternoon of Saturday, July 2nd. At 9:20 that evening, the jury reported to Judge German they stood deadlocked at 11-1.
Well, of course, if you've got if the jury, 12 people back are deliberating, and you've got one person holding out, a lot of times it's a whole lot easier to convince one person to put pressure on that one individual than it would be if it was split, say, 6-6 or 8-4.
By this time, on the street outside the courtroom, a crowd of area residents had steadily risen to about 100 people, all awaiting the verdict. Finally, at 9:51 p.m., after deliberating for 7 hours and 31 minutes, a verdict was decided. Jessie Hill Ford was not guilty. However, there was one juror who disagreed. William Lacey, the sole black man on the jury, had been the single dissenting vote.
After everything had been settled, this man called my mother and my father and told them that he wanted to come out and talk to them because he went through hell during the trial. And he wanted to talk to them and tell them the reason why that his decision was guilty. So he never did come out, and we never did talk to him. Of course, he's dead too. So we still don't know until today what he wanted to tell my mom and daddy.
Fearful that his family would be in danger if he kept the jury sequestered over the 4th of July holiday, he changed his vote.
I didn't believe a word Mr. Ford said. He carelessly misused a firearm and killed that boy. It was the whites giving Ford the trouble, not the blacks. I couldn't believe him.
The Dokes family did not feel as if justice had been served either.
My boy was shot down in cold blood, didn't have a gun, didn't have a pocket knife, didn't have anything.
Like I said that night, the night after the jury had given their verdict, not guilty. And as we were walking to the car, there were cameramen there, and they were asking questions. And no reflection, but at that particular time, I told them, I said, if my brother had a shot Jessie Hill Ford, he would have been gone a long time ago. He would have been in prison.
If my brother had killed him, it would have been quite different. He would have been gone a long time ago. So, you can judge that.
I feel that justice wasn't done, and I feel that I'll always feel that.
Later that evening, a grateful Ford held a press conference at his home.
A tragedy has occurred out here, and we've all been changed by it. It's something that I will never forget, and it's affected my life from here on out, and I'm very sorry for it. I'm also very grateful to the jury and to the court, and I'm grateful for my attorneys.
I feel saying the word "I'm sorry" really wouldn't be enough. I just don't know what I would want to hear, but just say "I'm sorry" just wouldn't be enough.
With the verdict for the Ford family, the tragedy appeared to have a happy ending, but just as in Ford's books, there were no happy endings. Ford's life had drastically changed. Critics accused him of cynically exploiting the racist system of Southern justice he had adopted in his books. A damaged reputation was not the only thing. Ford's pocketbook had been hurt as well. A mountain of legal fees and no current income forced Ford to sell his $350,000 28-acre Canterfield estate for a paltry $88,000, a price which barely covered his debts. 2 years later, Judge German presided over Ford's divorce proceedings in the same courtroom where he had been acquitted. His wife Sally was awarded almost everything. Ford moved to Nashville to live with his mother and tried to write. His next novel, The Raider, was satisfactory at best, and critics said this showed Ford could no longer write with the same style he once did.
As talented as Jessie is, he lost a lot of that creativity when he didn't have Sally and his family there to support him. So he wasn't as productive.
Ford remarried and continued to live in Nashville. Though he had a good marriage with his new wife Lillian, he had failed to come to terms with the shooting. The inner peace that he wanted somehow seemed to evade him. Instead of writing about the shooting, Ford always tiptoed around the issue. He described different versions of the incident, and in the end saw himself as the real victim, eventually alienating many of his critics. Friends noticed a difference in Ford and became startled by his new political outlook. Once a staunch liberal, Ford became an outspoken conservative who supported Oliver North and vehemently opposed flag burning. Ford continued to sell an occasional screenplay, traveled with his wife, and for the most part lived comfortably. Sadly, his life never did become what it once was.
After he remarried, I saw him a few times, but not as often, because he would come here occasionally to see his children, and I would see him, a neighbor would have him maybe for dinner or something, and I would see him and was concerned about him because he was extremely moody then.
Ford had open-heart surgery in late 1995 and fell into depression. On June 4, 1996, Ford locked himself in his library with a .22 caliber pistol. That night, he killed himself just as he had George Dokes with a single bullet to the head. Nearby were Ford's autobiographical manuscripts, which recounted his move from Humboldt to Nashville. Throughout the account, he said goodbye to everything that he loved about the town that had given him his greatest book and his worst memories.
Well, I just feel like he got whatever was due. That's the way I feel about it. When some reporters come out and they asked me right after the funeral, would we try to get revenge? And I told them no, because God said vengeance is mine. And so I said, we leave that up to him. And so he got his part.
For every kind story about Ford, there is another denouncing him. Ford's first wife, Sally, said in an interview to Esquire magazine, quote, "At his best, he was a true Southern gentleman. At his worst, a true devil. The people who are still around to remember Ford have two opinions of him: a good country boy sensitive about race relations, or a complicated, difficult man." Though not convicted in a court of law, Jessie Hill Ford suffered for his crime for 25 years. Most would agree that the shooting was an accident, and for every accident there is a victim of circumstance. Was it Dokes who accidentally pulled onto a stranger's property with no intent of harming anyone? Or was it Ford, viewed by some as a paranoid Southerner who just so happened to own the property? Early in his career, Ford once said he was fascinated with how one small mistake or one minor impulse could change the entire course of a man's life. For George Dokes Jr. and Jessie Hill Ford, a statement has never been so ironic and so true.